Welcome to day 7 of Understanding Wealth. I'm delighted to be here with you. My name is Mensah, and I'm going to continue from the sessions that we've covered over the last few days. In today's session, I'm going to be talking about what I consider to be perhaps one of the most important parts of the wealth creation, building, protection process. I'm going to be talking about the principle of management. And for many people, and for those of you watching, the principle of management is not one that you associate with wealth. And I'm going to try in the next few minutes and show you why and how you can become a little bit better, both as a manager and how you can use that to guide you towards achieving your financial dreams and goals. For those of you who are joining for the first time, it's an honor to be with you. For those of you who have been part of this journey so far, it's a joy to be back with you again. If you're joining for the first time, I want you to reach out to someone you know, someone you believe perhaps could benefit from what we're going to share today, and invite them. We want to invite as many friends and family members as we can. Invite your followers. What we want to try and do is reach out to as many people as we can. And the reason is simply because I believe genuinely that the wealth of any nation, the wealth of any country, is based on the individual wealth of the respective people that occupy the nation or the city. And so it all begins with one. So if you want to create a change in an environment, you start with one person, you start with yourself. But what you must do is wish for other people what you want for yourself. And that's the reason why we invite people, because we want to pass on to them what we wish for ourselves. And by doing that alone, we activate the law of giving, the law of receiving. Do unto others as you would that they do unto you. Now, I also want you to hold onto your journal and your notepad and use that to capture any ideas that you feel could be beneficial to helping you achieve your dreams and goals. Now, the principle of management is what we're going to talk about today. Management. And like I said, I think, and I still consider this to be perhaps the most important part of the journey towards creating wealth. If I sat down with you and you asked me a simple question, what should I study? How should I begin my journey towards creating wealth? I would ask you to study management. Now, I'll give you perhaps an insight as to why I think management is important. And I'll conclude today's session with a very relevant, but also very useful story that will draw everything that I share with you together. Now, I studied engineering. I did my Bachelor's of Science in Engineering. But when I finished my Bachelor's of Science, after working for a little while, I decided that I wanted to pursue the entrepreneurial path. At the time, I felt that it would have been best to go down and do and further my career by doing a master's course in management and in business. And so that's what I did. And I studied a master's degree in management and business. But for so many years, having graduated, haven't gone into the workforce, I realized that I could apply the principles that I had learned from management to business, to doing my work effectively, to managing clients' portfolios and projects. But I failed in my particular circumstances in my life. And it wasn't until I hit rock bottom financially that it dawned on me that the same principles you need to manage a business is the same principles you need to manage your life. It just needs application and refinement slightly differently. It took me a number of years to realize that I had been applying great principles of management to creating wealth for other people, but in my personal life, I had not applied any of the principles. Now, here was the reason. Many of us and most of us, we tend to see ourselves as individuals. We see ourselves as just a person. I'm a man, I'm a woman. For those who have a family, we see ourselves as a family. If you're going to create wealth, you have to let go of this concept, because that is what's holding a lot of people back. You must start seeing yourself. Now, I use this to represent a business. You are not an individual. You must move away from the thought of me being an individual, and you must see yourself as a business. You must see yourself as a company. This is very important. If you're going to create wealth, you must move away from the mindset and change your perspective and start seeing yourself as a company, as a business, not as a person. If you are a business, then every business has resources. And every business that I know of have a number of functions. There are about 3, in my opinion, critical functions of a business. You have organization in terms of operations, you have finance, and you have sales. These are some of the most important functions of every business. If you have no sales, you have no revenue. But you also need to manage the finances, because if you cannot manage the finances, then unfortunately, you don't understand the cash flow, and unfortunately, you can't make a profit. And without a profit, there is no business. But you need to know how to operate and manage the business. So these are 3 critical parts of a business. But you are a business, not an individual. Now, this is where most people, and some of you listening right now, might be struggling with the whole concept. If you see yourself as an individual, then you do not associate with that part of you that should be responsible for managing resources. Now, you might be thinking, what are the resources I have? Time, money, the talents and the gifts and the skills that have been given to you, knowledge, other people, the leverage you have through other people's money, other people's time, other people's knowledge. These are all resources that are available to you. Now, going back to the concept of a business, if you are a company and you see yourself at the company, then you are also what I call the CEO of the company. You're the chief executive officer of your company, meaning you're responsible. You are also the chief operations officer. You are also the chief information officer, and you are the chief financial officer. Now, I can keep going down this list because all this demonstrates are different roles that you play in your personal life, or rather that you should play in your personal life. Now, I found this to be very liberating because in my personal life, number one, I didn't see myself as the chief executive officer, meaning that I lacked accountability. And I believe, in my opinion, that accountability and the lack is one of the reasons why most people do not achieve their full potential. We always think it has something to do with someone. There's someone out there. There's something out there. And I love what Wayne Dyer said. He said, if you think that everyone else is responsible for your problems, then you have to send everyone else to a psychiatrist for them to get treatment for you to feel better. Now think about that. That's a very difficult task. People rarely change except they want to. Now, there are 2 ways and 2 perspectives you can have about your life. You can see yourself as the person responsible for everything in your life, good, bad, or indifferent, or you can see yourself as simply a victim, meaning it has to do with someone else. Now, I found in my personal life that things, external things, rarely change, and there are a few things that you can control. But there is one thing that you're guaranteed that you can control, and that's yourself. So you must see yourself as not just the CEO, but one who takes accountability for your life. Next, you must see yourself as the operations executive. You must see yourself as the chief information officer. Now, the chief information officer deals with knowledge, information, understanding, wisdom. No one else is responsible for your financial education but you. It's not the schools, it's not the government. The government and the schools have given you the foundation for you to go and pursue and find the knowledge that you need to become the best that you can be. It's a master's responsibility to open the door. It's the student's responsibility to go searching and go on the adventure of life. The master doesn't hold the child and walk with the child all the way through. The master will simply say, this is the door. You can go through the door and you have a whole world of adventure, but you get to choose. Now, finally, you're the chief financial officer. And many of us, and I did this for so long, we don't accept responsibility. I think I used to think that growth was automatic. And that's not true. I used to think that things would just fall into place, that I didn't have to be intentional about growth. And for that reason, for so many years, I didn't spend enough time in my education, in developing myself, in solving problems, in increasing my financial education and my financial understanding. You have to take responsibility. So I guess the first thing I'll say about management is simply that with management comes accountability. Accountability. You must be responsible. And this accountability is 100% and nothing less. 100%. If you're looking for financial freedom, recognize that financial freedom, or freedom of any sort, comes as a two-edged sword. On one side is freedom. On the other side is responsibility. You can't have one without the other. So if you're going to achieve financial freedom, achieve financial wealth, and if you're going to be a good manager, you've got to be accountable to yourself and to the resources that have been provided to you. That's the first thing. Success is not a matter of, chance, luck. Success is a product of choices and decisions. And you and I have to make those decisions. Now, the second part of the whole management principle is what I call honesty. You have to be honest. And I find this is where I struggled for a while. Just the failure to say, this is how it is. I'm struggling. I'm not achieving my dreams and goals. I always kept thinking, it's getting better. Now, there's a difference between having faith. There's a difference between having belief. There's a difference between having expectation and being honest. Being honest simply deals with how things are in the present. Having faith deals with how you want things to become in the future. So by changing your perspective, you change your results. So as a good example, if you said, for example, I am not poor, and you refuse to say, this is where I am. You see, one of the most important things I found is you've got to be true to yourself. And honesty deals with telling it as it is. You might say, I hate where I am. And what I found is that honesty and truth is what creates that burning desire, that passion, that obsessive focus that you need. Because every change that happens in life, think about this, every change that has happened, every breakthrough we've had has come as a result of a dissatisfaction with the status quo and the belief that it could be better, a better life, a better experience. The Wright brothers felt, well, we can get from one point to another quicker. It was a dissatisfaction with the current transportation system. In the same way, except you accept complete responsibility, except you're honest, you always see where you are as comfortable. And I found that most people fail in life, not because they don't have a big enough dream or big enough goal. Most people are failing because they've reduced the bar down to a very acceptable level. They've reduced the bar down to where they are and they've said, this is the best I can do. Or they've said, this is destiny. This is what I'm destined to do. I like what one great speaker says. He says that all of your beliefs that you have, that you embrace those beliefs for one of two purposes. Number one, to create a change. Number one. Number two, to create comfort. I thought that was powerful. You might go through life and things are not working well, and then you say, well, this is my fate, this is how life is meant to be. So you change your belief system, you alter your belief system so that it favors a little bit of comfort, and that comfort could be even in suffering. Very sad. And I can talk about this because, having traveled around the world, I found most cultures and most belief systems apply either of the two. You either have a belief system that supports a comfort mindset, or you support a belief system you have a belief system that supports a change mindset. So accountability is number one. Number two is honesty. You must be honest. Now, what I'd like to do with you now is just share some ideas about management, and I'll use myself as a guide or as a reference point, because I think part of the breakthrough that I had growing up was getting to the point where I hit rock bottom, and I realized that the reason I hit rock bottom was because I was simply a very terrible manager. In using this explanation, I'm going to use two parts of what you should manage. One is money, one is time. And I want to show you how, a number of years ago, how I used and managed my time and my money. And I'll make this in a numerical form so you can appreciate the percentages. Now, understand that life doesn't give you what you want. I think we've somehow gotten to a point, and we live in a society now whereby we think all we have to do is wish for something. Life doesn't give you what you want. Life gives you what you can manage. Life gives you what you deserve. If you show you deserve it through management, then you get more. The ancient writer says that if you're faithful with little things, then you'll be made ruler over much. For a number of years, I wanted a bigger house, the bigger cars, more accessories, more money, but I failed to manage what I had. So, and this will be a little bit harsh, but if you want a bigger home, if you want more space, if you want more rooms, if you want maybe a much more cleaner environment, the question I would ask you first is, how well are you managing what has been given to you? Now, what has been given to you might just be who knows, a 3 by 4 meter square space, maybe a 12 meter square room. That's all you have. But if I walked into your room, if I walked into your office space, will I see excellence? Will I see mastery in relation to cleanliness, in relation to the maximization of what has been given to you? It's not about the size. You see, in order for you to go from a 12 meter square, who knows, to a 1200 meter square dream house, you've got to show that you can manage what has been given to you. You have to show you can manage it. And that management deals with attitude. It deals with what you do. It deals with your approach. But more than anything, it deals with gratitude. Are you grateful? You see, gratitude is expressed in various ways. Some people say, well, I don't say I'm grateful enough. In many ways, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And I found that I met people who have been inspired by their lives, not because they said so much. I just observed what they did. And the way they handled what had been given to them was almost a testament to the fact that they had gratitude. They weren't abusive. They didn't abnormally use what has been given to them. And wealth shuns people. In other words, wealth will move away from you if you lack gratitude. In other words, if you lack the ability to manage. You attract success. You attract wealth by being attractive. You become attractive by how you manage the resources you have and what's been given to you. So if I go back a number of years, I found that when I got to the point where I was heavily in debt and I was struggling, I had to sit down and ask myself one question: what is going wrong? And it was like a light bulb moment for me. I realized that I wasn't managing my resources well. In relation to time and money, I mismanaged my resources. In terms of money, I sat down and I analyzed how I used my money and how I spent my money. Remember what I said day 2, day 4, and I think day 6. I made a statement about wealth. I said that wealth comes as a simple equation. W equals E minus I minus S. Now, for those of you who've been part of this so far, you've heard me talk about this equation so many times. But there's so much value, there's so much wisdom in this equation. The W represents wealth. Wealth and wealthy people earn, which is the E. The first thing they do after they've earned is they invest. And once they're done investing, they spend. But they spend not frivolously, they spend with purpose. They spend understanding a concept that your life will always be based on 2 particular needs. Necessities, what you need to survive, and your desires. Now, your desires, in many ways, you don't have to crush your desires. You just have to discipline your desires. And I found that you will never be able to earn enough money to satisfy your desires. That is an internal, inborn quality we have. The desire for more, for growth, for better things. You're never going to earn enough to satisfy all of your desires. So what you must do is manage your necessities. Discipline yourself to look through what are the core things that you need. Provide for yourself based on those core things. But you're providing after you've invested. So you're already limited. Now, I gave you a formula 2 days ago, or 2 sessions ago, which I called 65-35 as a plan. And I said 65% is what you must live on, 35% is what you invest. But because the wealthy invest first, this goes away first as an expense, meaning you have a balance of 65. So you have to discipline yourself to manage very carefully the resources that you have, which is now 65, to be able to cover your needs, your wants, and any other desires you might have. Necessities must be managed. Your wants must be managed. Your desires must be managed. Now, in my case, what I found was I spent about 40% of my money at the time I was renting. I spent about 20% of my time on what I call clothing and grooming. I spent about 20% on entertainment and socializing. I spend roughly about, if I'm being very honest, I spend roughly about 2% on saving. Then I spend roughly about 0 on education and learning. And the balance of between 8 and 10%, something in that region, I spent on my groceries. Now I want you to just take a look at this very carefully and tell me whether you spot something that doesn't seem right or something that seems out of place. What struck me was this, and I reflect now, and I reflect based on having a little bit better understanding about the purpose of money and how to attract wealth. 40% of your income, your net income, spent on rent or spent on a mortgage in the case that you're a poor manager. Because what you spend on your home, what you spend on your rent, should never be greater than between 30 and 35%. I normally say keep it at 30%. Now I know what many people might be saying, that's unrealistic. I'm not dealing with what's realistic. I'm trying to show you a formula for wealth. Remember, you only have 65% of what you earn to spend because 35 is going to be invested. If you spend 40% of what you have left of that 65% on rent, then you have barely anything left to survive, which would mean that life becomes very difficult. Now, here is the point I want to make. When you choose a neighborhood, you choose a lifestyle. Most people remain poor because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. If you choose a neighborhood, in London we have postcodes. If you choose a neighborhood, if you choose a location, if you choose a home, you have to choose a lifestyle. So for example, if you buy into an affluent location in London, what you tend to find is you have to buy the car that matches that location, or you have to dress in a certain way, because when you go down to the cafes and go down to the shops, you want to be dressed correctly. You don't want to be the person who stands out. But I found that when you choose a location, when you choose a neighborhood, when you choose a home, you increase or you decrease the cost of living. Not in terms of what you pay for the home, but all the accessories and the demands and the pressure that comes with living in that location. So automatically, I was poorly managing my resources. I should never have been spending 40%. And what makes it worse is this 40% was a liability to me, but that was going towards paying for someone else's assets. Now, if I owned my home, that's a different game. That's a different game. However, still, even if you own, it should still be between 30 and 35%. But if I owned, at least I'll be paying some of the equity back to myself. Then I was spending 20% on clothing, which in itself is a bit sad. Now, it's important to dress well, and I believe in the importance of styling and how you present yourself. I often say that people will see before they hear. And in many cases, I know for sure when you started watching this, the first thing you would have done would have been to observe the speaker. Style comes first before substance. It's a fact of life. The ancient book says that God looks on the inside, but man looks on the outside. And I don't think there's anything wrong in that. Because we observe based by our natural senses before we're able to use our higher faculties, intuition, to see and observe the environment. First, we have to see. So I'm a big supporter of how you groom yourself, but there's a limit. 20% on grooming meant that I was spending 20% on liabilities. Now, it doesn't matter what you have as accessories, the diamond rings, the gold watches, the beautiful crystals, and whatever you might have as accessories. I can guarantee you one thing. In 95% of the circumstances, they are liabilities. Because what you paid for something may not be what someone else values it as. And the buyer sets the price. The seller sets the price. The buyer decides the terms upon which the transaction is completed. So, I might buy a wristwatch. It's of value to me. I bought it for a lot of money. But to the marketplace, someone else might perceive it very differently because they have no emotional attachment to it. So I found that I was spending 20% of what I earned on clothing. And at the end of every single month, and this is the question I want you to ask yourself. Whenever you spend money, ask yourself the question, in 2 months, what I'm buying, will it have appreciated in value or depreciated in value? Now, understand something. I'm not suggesting in any way that you shouldn't buy good things. I'm simply saying you just have to buy them purposefully and using wisdom. You buy good quality, yes. But if you're one of those who buys impulsively, and for many of us, shopping is a habit. We don't shop for necessity. We generally shop for the wants, the desires, the luxury items. If you're shopping to satisfy your desires, except you manage your desires, what you find is that you overspend. Now, I'm not going to go through each and every one of these items, but I want to draw your attention to one particular one of them, and that is education. I wasn't spending any money on my education. Now, I've skipped saving for good reasons. But you see, because I wasn't spending money on my education, my financial intelligence was very low. Had I been spending a little bit more on my education, I would have known that this component part was labeled incorrectly. This should have been investing, not saving. The wealthy do not invest for the long term. They do not save for the long term, and they do not save actively. They might save passively for a short period, with a deadline, with a purpose, I would have known that saving was an obsolete way to creating wealth. But more importantly, had I been investing in my education, I would have known that the amount I was spending for rent, for clothing, for entertainment was too much. Now, represented as a percentage, 40%, 40%, 40%, these were liabilities. And they caused an expense every month away from me, every month. And therefore, 80% of what I was earning, I was spending on liabilities, which is really a recipe for poverty. In addition to that, I had 0 assets. Now, in session 1, I started by showing you what a financial statement looks like. I said you have income, you have expense, you have liabilities, you have assets. And I said the most important thing you must do for yourself if you want to build wealth is spend more time acquiring assets, but not any kind of assets. You must acquire assets that appreciate in value, meaning they increase in value, but more importantly, you must invest in assets that work for you. In other words, the assets create and generate cash flow, positive cash flow or income, so that the asset puts money back into your life. And you must minimize liabilities, especially liabilities that depreciate in value and create an expense that causes money to flow away from you. We covered that in day 2. I should have known, had I been investing in my education, that all I had were liabilities, and that meant that I would stay poor. Now, the left side of this financial statement creates freedom. The right side of the financial statement creates security and creates dependency. So I was a bad manager. I wasn't managing my resources effectively. But it wasn't just money. I also had a problem with time. I wasn't effectively using my time as well as I should. I could have used it much more effectively, much more efficiently. Now, there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency. You can do things right. We call that efficiency. But also you can do right things. We call that effectiveness. And success comes as a result of doing right things and not doing things, rather, not focusing on only doing things right. Because there's nothing so tragic as doing something so beautifully well, so efficiently, if that particular activity should not have been done in the first place. We call that a principle called, you're doing what we call figure eights. You're being busy doing nothing. You're just going round and round in a circle. And you should never mistake activity for productivity. In other words, you might be busy. The question is not what you're doing. The question is, what are you producing? What is the outcome? Not what do I do? What is the outcome? The outcome decides whether all of the work you've done has been successful. Now, coming back to the time usage, I found that I use my time every day like a very bad manager. Every day we get 24 hours. Everyone. There are very few things that I believe that we have equality in. Time is one of them. You know, we all have different skills, different gifts, talents, abilities. We all look different. Some are more beautiful than the others. Some are more intelligent than the others. Some are more emotionally understanding than other people. Some people have more empathy. So we all have different skills and gifts. But I found that time is the one area where we have equality. The beggar down the road, the billionaire in his mansion, the hairdresser down in the salon, all get 24 hours. You can't spend more than you get. You can't get more than you want. 24 hours. The clock strikes midnight. At 12:01, everyone gets a new fresh dose of 24 hours. So you see, the difference between the poor and the rich, in my opinion, deals with how they use their time. Bring me two people And I look at both of them and I can decide within a short time frame their financial future. And all I have to do is just look and observe, spend some time with them and see how they use their time. You see, poor people do not really see the value in time. They don't value time. Wealthy people and successful people value time. They understand the brevity of time. And so what they're looking for is for a return on their time invested. Now, I found in my case that every day I spend for work, I spend about 10 hours, usually between 10 and 12 hours. This 12 hours was if you included my preparation time to get ready for work before I left the house. Then I spent about 8 hours every day sleeping. Then I spent roughly about what I call social time. I spent between 4 and 5 hours doing my hobbies, doing going to the gym, texting, interacting with people, social media, Netflix, watching TV, just the general stuff. Go out to work after a hard day's work. You come back, you want to relax or de-stress. But then I found finally that I was spending roughly about 1.5 hours, roughly, doing the general stuff you do, eating, preparing meals, etc. every day, between 1.5 and 2 hours. Now I want you to look at these numbers again and just very quickly tell me if you observe something unique, something different, something that indicates either a missing component. Of course there is a missing component. Looking through these, between 10 and 12 hours I would spend preparing for work, traveling to work, working, traveling back from work. So there was very little I could do with this. We call part of this your waking day. The second part was my sleep time. I was spending 8 hours sleeping. I said this to someone a few weeks back and they didn't really like the statement. But I'll share the statement with you anyway because obviously it's my opinion, it's subjective, but I think there's some wisdom in the statement. The statement I made was this: if you're sleeping more than 8 hours every day and you're not financially free and you're not living the life you want, and let me qualify that statement, living the life you want. I mean life on your terms, doing what you want to do, when you want to do it, with whom you want to do it, as you wish to do it. That is life on your terms. That is what I call the extraordinary life. As a matter of fact, that is what the writer says, that I have come that you might have life and have it to the fullest, to have the abundant life, which is life based on who you were born to be, doing what you were born to do. Now, if you're not living that life, I don't think you should be sleeping more than 8 hours per day. Now, this is not to do with money. This is simply about understanding that if you do not have time and money freedom, that should be your focus. You should be focused on how you can set yourself free. I was spending 8 hours sleeping. Some days I slept more than that. But socializing and social media, I was spending between 4 and 5 hours, which I think is a little bit too much. You see, there is a relationship between how much time you put in entertainment, how much time you put in education, and the results you have in your life. Your mind is your most important asset. You can feed your mind with junk food, or you can feed your mind with great food. You can feed your mind with social, sensational stuff. It will produce whatever you feed it with. So if you're not happy with the results you're getting in your life, if you're not happy with any area of your life, the question you should ask yourself is, what am I feeding my mind? You see, I was feeding 4 to 5 hours every day on what I call considered entertainment. Now, there is nothing wrong with entertainment. Absolutely nothing wrong. As a matter of fact, it's wrong if you don't have any form of entertainment in your life. You need to find a way of switching off and doing things that bring you joy and pleasure and happiness. The problem is the problem has less to do with how much time. It's more the ratio. Looking at all of this, there's something missing here. And that word is education. Education. The ratio between entertainment and education is a very important ratio. Very important ratio. Wealth cannot be created without education. And you cannot manage your resources very well without education or wisdom. So I was mismanaging my time. And I had to sit down and ask myself, what was wrong? I said earlier on in one of the sessions that everyone who wants to create wealth must dedicate, in my opinion, between 5% and 10% of their time every day to continuous learning, to developing their mind. Now, this is equivalent to roughly about 1.5 to 2.5 hours every day. So, to change my life based on how I manage time and money, the first thing I said to myself was, how can I become more effective, not efficient, more effective in the use of my time? The first thing was work. I couldn't change the travel time, well, without changing where I lived. I couldn't also change the duration that I had to work for as part of my contract, but what I could do was become more efficient in how I used it. Now, during work, it meant I just had to be a little bit more focused, have a list of goals every day so that every day I was moving progressively towards a desired outcome. What I learned, however, is when I traveled to work, I spent most of my time traveling, and all I did was listen to music. I listened to, maybe watch the video, because I traveled by public transportation. So whilst traveling to work, I realized that I could use some of that travel time to support my education goals. So I decided that I would take part of my travel time and I will use that time for study. Now, I'm not suggesting that all you do when you travel is study, but audio learning is one of the most effective and most essential ways to learn. By deciding to combine my travel time with my learning time, I started to invest some time into my wisdom and education. And that is what I want to draw your attention to. Remember, what we're talking about here is management. And all you're doing is managing resources, finding out the best way and how you can move and channel some resources in a way that it creates a return on investment that far exceeds what you're getting today. Now, in terms of sleep, I made a decision to take down my sleep just by 1 hour, drop it down to 7 hours, and spend the first hour after waking up in the morning on myself. Invest that hour in myself. Before I go trying to build someone else's dreams and help people achieve their goals, put the first hour in myself towards my goals, towards my future. So I had 1 hour now from sleep, and I had 1 hour from travel. Now, in terms of travel, it took me roughly an hour to get to work and an hour to come back. But I knew I had to have a good ratio between education and entertainment. So what I did was I would listen to maybe something educational, inspiring, motivational, encouraging, enlightening. First, when I traveled, I would spend half the time studying and then the remaining half on entertainment. So it was quite balanced. Before I started getting bored with reading, I stopped. I had done half the time. Then it was time to listen to music, to listen to something funny, to watch something on my mobile device. But I had invested in myself. And what I found is every day, suddenly, I was now investing about 2 hours without really making any huge changes to my lifestyle. Now, this meant that the social media time I could also reduce by just dedicating some more productive time towards other events, getting around people and associating with people who were living the life I wanted to live. The point I'm making with all of this is to explain and show you that I stayed poor and I wasn't achieving great results for so long because I mismanaged time and money. And if you're going to change your life, if you're going to create wealth, you've got to sit down and ask yourself a simple question: am I effectively managing my resources? If your answer is yes, then I can guarantee you that just like you have the promise that there will always be time to sow and a time to reap, I can guarantee you that wealth will always find you. Now, if your answer is no, then automatically you now know what to do to make changes. You have to make changes. If you're going to change your life, you have to change yourself. It all begins with you. Now, I'm going to slowly bring this to a landing, to a close. But before I do that, I want to just draw your attention to some principles. Some principles that I think will be helpful. And I think the best way of sharing these principles with you is to draw on a story that really resonates with me. It's called the parable of the talents. It's an ancient story about a master who had 3 servants, and he was going to travel for a while. And before he did, he called the 3 servants and he said to them individually, I'm going to go away for a short while, but I'm going to return. I'm going to give each and every one of you some talent. And stay with me here, because I don't want you to get really emotional about this talent or the story, because when we're talking about talent, I'm really talking about resources. Don't forget the theme is management. The master says, I'm going away for a short while, and here are some talents. When I come back, we can all come together, we can sit down, and we can go through what you've done with it. But I want you to put to good use what I'm giving you. The master goes away as promised, but before he left, he gave each and every one of the servants some talents. Now, there were 3 servants. The first of the servants was given 5 talents. The second was given 2 talents. And the third was given 1 talent. Fairly simple. A talent needs to be understood for what it's worth, because most people hear the parable of the talents and they say, well, it was ancient. Let's not deal with ancient stories. But I believe very much in the wisdom of the ages. And this is one of those wisdom stories that everyone should understand. A talent was simply a weight of gold. 1 talent is equal to about 50 kilograms of gold. Now, in today's current gold rate, is a kilogram of gold is equal to about 30,000 pounds. It's actually about 30,200 pounds today. It fluctuates. I think last week it was 30,700 or something of that nature, but it fluctuates. But on average, it's about 30,000 pounds. Last week it was about 31,000 pounds. The week before it went up to 32. So it does fluctuate. But let's use 30,000 pounds for simplicity. So let's convert these 5 talents, the 2 talents and the 1 talent, to today's currency, so you have a better understanding about how much was given to each and every servant. Now, 5 talents based on 50 kilograms per talent and based on 30,000 pounds per kilogram is equivalent to 7.5 million pounds in today's currency. 2 talents is equivalent to 3 million. Simply 2 by 5 by 3. 3 million pounds. 1 talent is equivalent to 1.5 million. Now, automatically, you would agree with me that what the master gave to the servants was a substantial amount of money. Let me qualify something right here, right now. A servant back in those days was not necessarily someone who was a slave. It was simply someone who was trusted and someone who worked for a master. In this case, you and I are servants. Life has given us talents. life has given us resources. Now, how does this apply to you? Now, this is what the account of the story says, and I want you to understand this. A talent in this example can be substituted with various things. It could be called a gift. It could be called a talent in terms of an ability you have. It could be called resources. Now, the master teacher came back as he promised. When he came back, he called the 3 servants and they all got together and he said, I want you to give accounts. And that is the word. I started today talking about the word accounts. And this is what the master said to the servants. I want you to give accounts. I want you to be accountable to me based on what you used, the resources I gave you. Tell me what you had done, what you did, what I gave you. A fairly logical expectation. Now, the first servant said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. I took the 5 talents you gave me. I found something good to do with it. I invested it. And I knew you were going to be here today. So I have come before you, Master, with 10 talents. The 5 you gave me originally and another 5. So I multiplied what you gave me. Exceptional. Exceptional. The master said, you've done great. Well done. And that's what we want life to say to us. Well done. Now, the word well done always is succeeded by something else. You always give him more. If life says well done, expect more. The second servant gave a similar account. He said, I took the talent you gave me, I put it to use. And I'm very happy to say that I have an extra 2 talents. So I've converted the 2 talents you gave me to 4 talents. Here is the 2 you gave me originally, and here's an extra 2. The master was delighted. He said, well done. Now to the last servant, the master said, give account. Be accountable. The servant said, unfortunately, master, I was worried. I didn't want to lose what you gave me. So I took the talents, the gold you gave me, and I safely wrapped it around and I hid it somewhere. And I knew you were going to be here today, so I found it, dug it up. And here is the original 1 talent you gave me. In the same wrapping that I used from day 1. Nothing happened, I didn't lose it. Now the account of the story says that the master became very upset. Now he was so upset that he said, take this 1 talent from the person who didn't use their talent and give this 1 talent to the person who has 10. So the person who has 10 now has 11, and the guy who has none has none. But in addition to that, there were repercussions for not using the talent. Now, why have I shared this story with you? Very simple. I'm going to draw on approximately 10 wealth principles from this story. 10 wealth principles so you can understand. And if you can grasp each of the principles, what you find that creating wealth becomes a lot more easy to understand, but more easy to apply. Principle 1. All of us, every one of us in life has been given a gift. We've all been given resources. We've all been given talents, skills, abilities. Number 1, we've all been given something. And life expects us to take what we've been given and put it to good use. Life simply says, I've given you something. I'm not going to stand in your way. Take what I've given you, put it to good use. But you will give account for what you've been given. That's the first thing. So everyone gets something. Number 2, not any 2 people or no one gets exactly the same thing. One was given 5, one was given 2, one was given 1, which is an indication that it's better for you to focus on yourself than look across at the neighbor and compare yourself against someone else. You must compare yourself against you. When the master came back, the master asked the question, what did you do with the talents? The master didn't compare the first servant with the third. No, he said, what did you do? Each servant said, I gave account, or I used, or I didn't use, based on what was given to me. So the principle I'm sharing with you here now is this. Number 2 leads to number 3. Number 2 says we're all going to get something. It will be different, but we'll all get something. Number 3, principle number 3 of wealth is that everyone will get the same opportunity. And the reason is simply because everyone has infinite potential, and that is simply because we all have a mind, and there is only one mind in the world, just one mind. We have access to the same mind. I'll say that again. We have access to the same mind. The mind that I have and access to my mind, you have the same, access to the same mind, the infinite mind. But how we use it varies. So every one of us is going to get a gift, a skill, talent, abilities, but we have to develop the skills. But we've been given unlimited potential. How we use it is up to us. Number 4. If you want to be wealthy, you cannot save. You must invest. The principle of wealth creation begins with understanding how to invest. You see, the first servants invested what was given to him. The second invested what was given to him. The third saved. He buried it, which is saving. The first 2 multiplied it, which is investing. Now you might be thinking that the master didn't lose because he had the same gold. Now, remember that what we had to do is transfer this into today's currency. The first servant had 7.5 million. The second servant had 3 million. The third had 1.5 million. Here is the point. If I gave you 7.5 million today, and I came back in 20 years, and all you had was the exact same money I gave you, in the same box or suitcase, and you gave it back to me, you've just lost. You just lost some of my money. And the reason is simply because inflation is wiping away your money every single day. It's a principle of wealth creation. You don't save, you invest. If you take 7.5 million, inflation is 2.9%. If you save in the bank, it's roughly 0.025% today. And therefore, if you look at both, that is what you're getting from the bank. This is what is wiping away your savings. So the purchasing power of the currency is dropping every day. The talent that was given to the person who had none, or the person who had one originally, that was later on taken from him. But the reason the master was disappointed was because he lost money. Life expects you to invest what has been given to you. And if you don't invest what has been given to you, what you've done is you've robbed life of the greatness that should have been left in the world. In other words, the service you create for other people determines your compensation, determines the rewards you get. If you choose not to use your skills and your gifts, what you've done is you've robbed the rest of the population, the rest of the world, you've robbed us of the great life that we should have experienced. Now, the next time you walk down the street, and let's say, for example, you walk past a tree, if you've ever walked past a tree and it's been a really hot, scorching day, and you stood by somewhere that has had some shade, and you felt a little bit cooler, if this was a tree, then if you have the attitude of gratitude, then I'm sure in your heart you're probably thinking, I'm glad someone planted this tree. You see, it takes one person or two people or a group of people to make a decision to make a contribution towards the future for the generations to come, even when they know they might not see it. So a lot of the trees and a lot of the houses and a lot of the things we enjoy in life today that we have paid nothing for came as a result of people making a contribution. You and I have a responsibility. So if you have a skill, if you have a gift, if you have a talent that you don't give back to the world, that you don't serve to the world, what you've done, you've robbed us of the ability to have experienced a more comfortable life. And life doesn't enjoy that. Now, the next principle I want to talk about, a management principle I want to talk about from the story is this. If you look through the story and you observe it, you find out that it's a principle of attitude. Every one of those servants had a different attitude towards life, and wealth is always in proportion to your attitude. The third servant had a fear that he could lose the money, and that fear limited him. You see, there is a polar opposite to fear, and the polar opposite to fear is understanding, is wisdom. If you want to eliminate fear, you must increase your wisdom. You must increase your understanding. But if you want to increase your wisdom and understanding, you must spend time studying. But if you want to study, you must use your resources well, and that is the resource of time. But more importantly, you must use the resource of money, because you might have to invest in the materials. So it comes down to a simple process, simple philosophy. Management. If you manage your resources well and time, you can study. If you study effectively, you can increase your wisdom. And where there is wisdom, there is no fear. Because where there is wisdom, there is knowledge. And where there is knowledge, fear disappears. There is no doubts. Remember that fear is simply a reflection of something you don't know. Something you don't know. Think about this. When you're fearful of something, it's an indication that there is an unknown. Now, how do you eliminate the unknown? Increase your understanding, increase your study, increase your knowledge. So the principle of wealth comes down to attitude. They had a different attitude about what was assigned to them. The first servant felt positive. He knew, well, I've been given time, but also I've been given money. And here is the point I want to make from this wealth principle. So many people are waiting for opportunity. And opportunity is like a really beautiful woman. Very beautiful woman. She doesn't wait for anyone. She understands her value. She understands her worth. So she doesn't come knocking at your door. You have to stand by the roadside and wait for her arrival. And when she comes passing by, she doesn't stop. If you're not waiting, and you're not waiting eagerly, she moves on by. Opportunity does not wait at the door and knock. Forget that principle. Opportunity does not come to your door. Opportunity passes by. And your opportunities, and the greatest opportunities that you might even think about, are passing by every day. But if you don't have a positive attitude, a positive mindset that says, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to study. I'm going to learn. And then I'm going to take a risk. There are some principles about wealth creation that I want to just perhaps digress and talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is this. No one has all the answers to all of life's questions. If you want to create wealth, you must start by finding someone who understands what you want better than you. Now, there are many people who are saying, I have some money, but I don't know what to invest in. That is an indication of a poor, I should write this down. It's an indication that you're a poor manager. If you have capital and you say, I don't know what to invest in, you have simply indicated one word: ignorance. You're simply saying, I haven't studied. You're simply saying, I haven't learned. I haven't increased my understanding, because we've had 7,000 years of recorded history, and the principles of creating wealth, in my opinion, from my little understanding, have not changed in 7,000 years. The reason is simply because there are fundamental laws that haven't changed. They have not changed. If you follow the laws, you get the results. Now, the applications and the strategies and the vehicles may have changed, but the fundamentals are still the same. So if you're saying, I have money, I have £1,000, I have £2,000, but I cannot find a good investment, it's an indication of ignorance, because you've violated one of the laws of creating wealth. Number one, pay yourself first. Take a portion of what you earn and set it aside. You've done that. If you have any savings, then obviously you've applied one of these principles. That is great. Number two, invest. But invest under the direction, under the guidance, using the wisdom of people who have succeeded in that area. But to know the people who have succeeded, you have to study, because the people don't come knocking at your door. When you've studied, now you can identify who you need to be following their recommendations. So for example, today's session, I'm sharing with you one of the wealth creation strategies, how you become financially free. And we're talking about management. I'm providing you with knowledge. Your responsibility is to take the information I'm sharing, think about it, but don't accept it. Think about it. Then do some more research, do some more study, spend time, interact with people, gather some more information. When you have all of them, sit down and ask yourself, which of these can help me achieve my goals? Which of these can help me achieve my dreams? And then make the right decision for yourself. But it all begins with you sitting down and studying. So you've started already through study. If you're listening to this, you're studying. The next thing is then to take that information you have through study and then find the best investment. How do I invest? Once you've done that, following the directions of wise counsel, the guidance of intelligent counsel, and the wisdom of intelligent people, what you then do is take the interest generated from the investment and then reinvest. These are some basic fundamental laws of wealth. So it's all about attitude. The first servant had a positive attitude. His attitude was, I have time, but I have money. I'm going to find something to invest in. I'm going to do it smartly, wisely, but I'm going to take a risk. And if you're not willing to take a risk, you can't grow. If you can't take a risk, you can't become your best, you can't progress. But risk is reduced where there is understanding and where there is wisdom. Now, I've given you 7 principles so far in that whole process. I want to give you number 8, because I think number 8 is where I might summarize. Now, I talked about 10. I think that story is so rich, I can give you maybe 15 or 20, but let me just talk about number 8. The account of the story ends with the master taking one and the only talent that the final servant had and giving it to the first servant. And that is simply a principle of life, that whatever you fail to manage, you will lose. Whatever you fail to manage, you will lose. So, if you're not living the life that you want, if you don't have what you really, really want, if you're not financially free, if you're not wealthy, if you're not achieving your financial goals, it's simply an indication that you have failed to manage what has been given to you, and therefore life has taken back what it gave you and is given to someone else. Now think about this. Why is it that most people who are wealthy, very wealthy, why is it at the end of their lives, not every one of them, some of them, most of them, do not give their kids all of the wealth? Instead, they assign them a portion, and in many cases, they donate the wealth to other causes. It's a simple principle. Anything you achieve too early, too soon, without paying the price for it, is rarely appreciated. A lot of the wealthy people who are smart recognize that the same gift that they might give to their kids will ruin their lives. Why? The kids did not develop and had not developed the attitude of management. Now, let me take you back a number of years ago. It's a story. It's from the ancient Babylonian times, and it talks about a man who was the wealthiest in the city. And as part of the custom, every child would obviously, as the father got older, inherit the father's wealth. But this man was very wise because he had built his wealth from nothing. He understood the power of wisdom and how wealth is created. So he called his son and he said to the son, I'm getting old, but I have, as part of the custom, I have to pass on what I have to you. I have no problem with that. But I want to make sure that what I'm giving to you will be a blessing and not a curse. So he said, I'm going to give you some gold, but also I'm going to give you some words of wisdom. The words of wisdom will be what we call words to guide you. These words, he said, made me who I am. And he said, I want you to take these words of wisdom, and I want you to take the gold, which is the resources, and I want you to go to a different city, and I want you to find a way to invest, put to use these resources I've given you. Make a name for yourself, develop and build and create. And in 10 years, I want you to come back and give account. This follows the same principle as the talents. Come back and give account of what you did. Now, I'm not going to talk about the entire story. I want to draw attention to just one simple point. He sent his son away to learn, to prove himself. But he gave an instruction. Come back and give accounts. Now, the story says that the son started the journey, made some terrible mistakes, blew all the money away. That should not be a surprise because within a space of 18 to 24 months, most lottery winners, probably about 95% of lottery winners, after winning 30, 40, 100 million pounds, most lottery winners are bankrupt. As a matter of fact, they're worse off than they were before they won the money. Why? Simply because they hadn't developed the skills and the gifts and the talents that were given to them. They hadn't put their resources to good use. In other words, they avoided the process. But they got the promise. And unfortunately, they didn't pay the price. And because they got this too soon, too early, in 18 to 24 months, they lost it all. They were poor managers. They couldn't manage the resources that were given to them. Why? Simply because they had been failures in managing small amounts. And therefore, when they were given large amounts, they simply could reproduce who they were. You see, you always produce who you are. Now, this son squandered. Now, he didn't spend. He tried to make important business decisions, but he didn't have wisdom. Because although he had the wisdom in tangible form, he hadn't sat down to read them. So I say to people most times, don't buy books and stack them up in your library and tell people how great a library you have. Buying information does not lead to understanding. You have to discipline yourself to sit down and read, but read from a point of view of wanting to understand. Read for wisdom and then apply what you read. Now, after a number of years, he had wasted a part of the 10 years, and he had wasted all of the money the father had given him. But eventually he sat down one evening and he began to read the wisdom principles the father had given him. And those principles led him down a path of developing his managerial skills. to the point where he then started to create wealth, created so much wealth, became one of the wealthiest men in the other city, came back to his father after 10 years and gave accounts. And the account was so favorable that the father was impressed. The point I'm making with that is simply this. Whatever you fail to manage, you will lose. Most people say the wealthy are stealing the wealth from the poor. The rich steal the wealth from the poor. How can you steal from someone who has nothing? Now think about that. It's a principle of life. Money follows management. Money is attracted to management. You see, money is attracted to a beautiful fragrance. If you smell good, money is attracted to you. So the wealthy are not stealing the wealth. They simply follow the principle of management, and therefore money is drawn to them. Now, every business that is run by someone who is successful at managing always recognizes that if there is a merger, if an investor buys over a company, if there are two companies that come together, the first thing that happens is the investor, the new business or the larger business will always ask the question, is the manager, is the person in charge competent? The first person who is normally released is always the number one person, the CEO, the executive director, the executive officer, the vice president or the president. The person in charge goes. Why? Or stays. Money follows management. And if they come in and they look through the books, the first thing they say is, have the resources been managed properly? Give accounts. So I'm going to conclude by asking you 4 or 5 questions. And this will tell you or give you an indication about how much of a manager you are. Number 1, do you have a financial statement? Do you have a financial statement? Not a credit report, a financial statement. A financial statement that itemizes all of your expenses, that has a section on your income sources and the amounts, that has a list of all of your liabilities and the amounts, that has all of your assets. So, in other words, do you have a financial statement that tells you what your net worth is? Number 2, do you have a wealth statement? A wealth statement shows you the income you receive from investments and the expenses you have. And therefore, it gives you what we call your wealth ratio. That gives you an indication of how long you can survive without having to work. Number 1 and number 2. I would ask you this question also. Do you review your financial statement and your wealth statement every month? I'll let you decide. Number 3, I would ask you a question, and that would be, in the last 3 months, what has been the increase or the decrease in your income expense statement? In other words, what has been the percentage reduction in your expenses? Are there items that have reduced, or are there items that you're paying more for? And do you know why? Now, a lot of these seem as though you're being asked to be very, very analytical. Remember this, that you are, like I said at the start, you're the CEO of your company. You're the CFO of your company. Now, I want you to imagine that you were running a Fortune 500 firm and your CFO came into your office when you had your final monthly meeting and said, we made so much money, maybe about 2 or 3 billion in revenue, but I can't account for about 75% of where the money went to. Now, you know well, like I know, that probably he wouldn't have his job beyond the next day if he cannot give account. And this is what's happened to me for a long time. I couldn't give account of where the money was going. As a matter of fact, I was one of those people who would always say the sentence, I don't know where my money goes. I just don't know. That is an indication of poor managerial skills. I would ask you, do you know whether there's been an increase or a decrease over the last 3 months in your expenses? And finally, number 4, I would ask you a question. Do you have a way of tracking and monitoring how much you spend? And are you deliberately increasing your assets and investments and minimizing your liabilities and expenses. Now, those 4 questions, I think, hold within each of them the key. Now, I expect your answer to be yes if you consider yourself as a very good manager. Now, in my case, when I started years ago, my answer to all of those was no. And that is where I had to start. So as I draw to a close today, I know today's session hasn't been about numbers. And most people don't consider management to be as sexy as the word investing or the word success. But it's important. It's like one of the most important foundations upon which you should build wealth. If you cannot manage the little things in life, life will not give you the big things. So here is my recommendation to you. Why don't you start managing one day? One day. How would you do that? Accountability, honesty, manage the resources that have been given to you. So here is my recommendation. Over the next 30 days, just do this for fun. Just play around with it and see whether you commit to it and just do it, whether you enjoy it or you don't. But over the next 30 days, every day, I want you to just simply make note of what you spend your money on. Write it down. If you buy, a pack of cigarettes, write it down. You're keeping track. The whole purpose is not to be difficult to go through and ask you why you're spending an amount on a particular item. No, the whole purpose of it is to show you one thing and one thing and only. I want to show you your habits. Habits create wealth. Habits lead to poverty. There are good money habits and there are poor money habits. The difference between people is in the habits. Now, everything I've shared today and everything I've shared in the past 6 days and 6 sessions, intellectually, you understand. Everyone that I've shared some of these principles with understand it intellectually. They get it. They know what they need to do. We have to spend less. I have to invest more. You get it. The question is, why are you not doing it? It's very simple. Because there is something called habits that stands in a way as an obstacle that stops you from doing what you should do. And therefore, if you want to get across this, what you must do is get rid of the old habit and find a new habit. Now, I'm not suggesting through this teaching that you change or try to improve your old habits. You do not change and permanently make an impactful change by trying to play around or alter an old habit. You must rid yourself of the habit completely by substituting the old habit with a new habit. You don't change old habits by trying to change what you're doing. The only way you can make an old habit obsolete, find a new habit. So you must understand one side of it is wealth. The other side is poverty. You don't mix both. Think about this. If you have a glass of water that is half filled, if I pour in any form of oil, if I pour oil into that glass, what you find is that the water and the oil do not mix. They cannot mix. They cannot mix. In the same way, you don't mix poverty habits and wealth habits. You must displace the poverty habits completely, flush it out of your system and replace it with wealthy habits. You can't have both. You don't try to fix and say, well, I have a little bit better poor habits. No, it has to go. So the point I'm making is this. For the next 30 days, just keep track of how you spend your money. For one reason only, awareness. You just want to increase your awareness and see whether there are things you're spending money on subconsciously, habitually, without really understanding. And that could start to change the direction of your life. Now that's all we're going to talk about today. I hope you found something worth sitting in for. I want to thank you as always. It's been a joy to come into your homes. And in tomorrow's session, we're going to take it a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about a few more wealth strategies. And I want to say this, by day 10, which is literally in 2 or 3 sessions from now, we would have completed the lowest side of what I talked about, which is wealth. We would have concluded what I call the lowest level of wealth. And we can start moving into the higher levels of wealth, which is the mental level, the psychological level, and we'll go into the spiritual level of wealth, which is the highest level of wealth. So far, 7 sessions we've been dealing with the material level of wealth that leads to financial freedom. That is the lowest level of wealth. And in my opinion, I don't think it's the most exciting part of wealth. When you get into the mental and the spiritual level of wealth, it gets very exciting. Now, I hope you found something quite useful and something you can apply in your life. I want to wish you the best. God bless.